Hi everyone, I hope you're doing very well. My name is Juan and welcome back to another book review. So today we're going to talk about the great novel Moby Dick by the American writer Herman Melville. And if you appreciate my reviews and would like to show your support, please give this review a like and subscribe to my channel. That way this video will get to more people who might also enjoy it. Thanks. Okay, so let's talk about Moby Dick, which was first published in 1851. Moby Dick is one of those classics that most people have heard about, but that not many people have read. I'm not judging anybody here, okay? Until very recently, I was one of those people. I even tried to read it once or twice before, but I would always get discouraged and stop reading it every time I tried. I think reading Moby Dick takes determination, but most readers could tackle it, I also believe that, if only they gathered enough motivation. It is a very long novel and its prose can be dense, that's true, not only because of the kind of old-fashioned language used, because it is a novel from more than 100 years ago, but also because it is rich in references that are not incredibly obvious to us now. But once I got into it, I found it surprisingly fascinating. So this is going to be a review from someone who has read Moby Dick once and was pleasantly surprised by it. I will read it again for sure. I think that Moby Dick is the kind of novel that not only deserves to be read more than once, but that also requires its readers to go back to it more than once. I know that next time I read Moby Dick, I will be a lot less intimidated by it. In fact, I don't think I will be intimidated by it at all. I also know that I will take my time with it next time and probably let some of the ideas in the novel sit in with me a little bit longer before I move along with my reading. So my focus on this first read was to make it through successfully and finishing the novel. But now that I have achieved that, after many years of thinking that it might never happen, I feel like I don't have anything left to prove myself about Moby Dick. So reading Moby Dick has also made me curious about reading other works by Melville. If I can, what I'd like to do is start by reading an author's masterpiece first, and then explore more of his or her works later. And that's how I've approached Melville, and I think it worked. If I read more by him, I'll certainly let you know my thoughts in due course. But let's now go back to Moby Dick, shall we? So, believe it or not, this novel, Moby Dick, can be fun to read. I even chuckled a few times, and I like the relationship between the narrator protagonist, Ishmael, and one of the harpooners, Pequod. Some critics have seen more than a friendship between these two characters, and I think I tend to agree with that assessment. But there is also an ominous tone, particularly after the ship is hit by a typhoon, that I also quite enjoyed. Moby Dick has something very Old Testament-like about it, which I think that most 19th century readers would have understood better than us, but that I think still sets a unique tone, at least to part of the novel, or parts of the novel. Another thing I must say is that this novel is so present in American and Western culture, and there are so many references to it, which, by the way, was one of the main reasons that motivated me to read it, that I don't think I will be spoiling anything by saying that Moby Dick is the name of a huge whale. Captain Ahab is the man who wants to hunt it down and kill it in revenge for having lost his leg, and that Ishmael is the sailor who narrates the whole story. I knew all of that going in even before I read the novel, and I think most people intending to read this novel at some point also know that too. I don't think I could say in a sentence or two what Moby Dick is about, but among other things, I think it is the story of an obsession which is not positive, because obsessions are never positive. They never lead to anything good. So Captain Ahab becomes more and more obsessed with hunting down and destroying Moby Dick the longer he searches for the whale. And I think that level of obsession is easy to understand. Just forget it is about a whale. Who hasn't become obsessed, even maddeningly obsessed, about doing something at some point in their life? So Moby Dick is also an epic adventure, but there is also another deeper dimension to it. I think we could read Moby Dick literally or as an allegory. This was my first reading, so I tended to relate to the novel more on a literal level than as an allegory, but I am now more interested to explore it as an allegory when I go back to it. But know that you can read this novel just as an epic adventure about a bunch of men searching for a huge killing whale and what happens to them. Will they find the whale? How will this end? You know, that kind of thing. But you should also know that there is a lot more to this novel than just that. For example, there is a lot about whales and what whales mean culturally in the novel, what a creature like that means and how that meaning has changed throughout history. I find that fascinating. That aspect of the novel appealed to me more than the adventure element, but your reaction might be different. Anyway, this is all I can say, I think, about the incredible novel Moby Dick without spoiling it for people who have not read it yet. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to summarize the plot and talk about Moby Dick in more detail, and there will be some spoilers. So this is my warning. If you don't want to hear any spoilers from me about Moby Dick, I think you should stop watching this video right about now, and I will see you again very soon, I hope, for another video. Okay, for those of you who are still here, thank you. I'm now going to summarize the plot and share more thoughts I had on Moby Dick. So the novel, as I said, is narrated by Ishmael. He's a sailor who has decided to become a whaler. So he goes to New Bedford, Massachusetts with that intention. There he stays in an inn, but he's forced to share a bed, not just a room, a bed, with a man named Pequod, who is a Pacific Islander who works as a harpooner in whaling expeditions. At first, Ishmael finds Pequod strange, but the two men gradually form a bond, and they decide to ship aboard the same whaling vessel. So Ishmael and Pequod go to Nantucket, and there they board the Pequod. The Pequod is owned by two Quaker men named Peleg and Bildad. The captain of the ship is a mysterious man named Ahab. Ishmael finds out that Ahab has lost a leg on his most recent voyage when he encountered a whale. The Pequod sets sail on Christmas Day. It's very cold, and the crew is made up of men from all kinds of different nationalities, included a man from my native island of Tenerife, which is probably not important to the story, but I thought it was nice. Anyway, Captain Ahab announces that he wants to find and kill the white whale he lost his leg fighting against. This whale is known as Moby Dick. The ship keeps traveling south, whales come into the men's view, but no one can hunt any yet. Then a group of strange men comes out of the hold, and they turn out to be Ahab's private harpoon crew. They are led by a man named Fedallah, who seemingly has prophetic powers that will help or should help find Moby Dick. The Pequod gets to the Indian Ocean through the southern tip of Africa. Eventually, the men manage to hunt some whales. Whenever the Pequod encounters other whaling vessels, Captain Ahab asks their captains if they have seen Moby Dick. And in one of those vessels, there is a prophet, another prophet named Gabriel, who says that anyone who tries to harm Moby Dick will be met by doom. Later, there is an accident, and one of their harpooners, a man called Tashtego, almost dies by getting caught in a dead whale's head that sinks with him inside in the ocean. But Pequod saves him. Later, the Pequod's cabin boy Pip goes crazy after being left on a whaleboat for too long, and he also becomes a kind of prophetic jester for the crew. Not long after that incident, the Pequod encounters a ship whose captain, Boomer, has lost an arm because of Moby Dick. Ahab and Boomer talk about this, but Boomer cannot understand why Ahab wants revenge on the whale. A little later, Pequod gets sick, and even a coffin is made for him. However, he recovers, thankfully. Ahab feels like he will soon see Moby Dick, so he gets his men to make a new harpoon for that encounter. They keep hunting whales, but no sign of Moby Dick yet. Fedallah then prophesies that Ahab is going to die at some point. Well, everyone's going to die, so hey ho. But anyway, however, the way that he describes Ahab's death makes Ahab believe that he will not die at sea. Later, there is a typhoon, but the only death happens after the storm ends when one of the sailors falls from the masthead and drowns. Not a good omen. Ahab and Pip spent a lot of time together, they're always together, but who is the craziest of the two, really? Ahab is obsessed with killing Moby Dick, and his desire to do so only grows as the narrative goes on. The Pequod then encounters more whaling vessels as it nears the equator, and their respective crews report having come across Moby Dick. Finally, one day, Ahab sees the whale. The first attempt to kill it is unsuccessful, so they try again the following day, but Fedallah dies in that second attack. They try to kill Moby Dick on the third day again, but the whale sinks the Pequod. Moby Dick kills Ahab. In fact, the only one who survives is Ishmael, who should not come as a surprise since he's the narrator of the story. There wouldn't be a story had he died because no one could have told it. Anyway, Ishmael survives by getting on top of that coffin that was made for Queequeg, when he was sick earlier in the story. Eventually, Ishmael is rescued by one of those other whaling vessels the Pequod had previously encountered. And that is the end of Moby Dick. So, as I said, there is an ominous tone. I think the deaths are foreshadowed many times, but there is also a lot of action and a lot of adventure. Something that I find strangely fascinating is that so many characters in the novel believe in prophecies and how that contributes to the ominous tone. Everything seems to indicate that Ahab and others are doomed, and it just turns out to be true. Another thing that got me interested while reading this novel was how the crew of the Pequod was made up of men from different nationalities and ethnic groups. I feel like I learned a lot about how white Americans saw other people, including Americans of other ethnic groups. And I was fascinated by the positive impact Queequeg had on Ishmael. Ishmael starts off being very prejudiced, but gradually overcomes that thanks to his relationship with Queequeg. Okay, if you have already read Moby Dick, please let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I would really appreciate that. And if you haven't read the novel yet, please let me know what you think of my review. That's also always helpful. And whether you think you will read the novel now. And if you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it with your friends and family on social media. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Twitter or Instagram at Bookish Islander, so we can talk about books on other platforms. This is all from me. I hope to see you again very soon for another book review or bookish video. Bye for now.